The sound of iron chains echoed through the dark, wet halls of Carthage prison as two women were dragged into the Roman Empire's darkest dungeon. One came from nobility, the other was a slave. One held a newborn in her arms, the other carried life inside her womb. But both carried something even more dangerous in Roman eyes: the Christian faith. In the year 203 AD, Perpetua and Felicitas would face one of the most brutal and terrifying punishments ever imagined by mankind. What awaited them wasn't a simple death, but a public show of agony, an hours-long bloodbath under the burning Carthaginian sun, in front of a roaring crowd hungry for pain. But their tale is more than one of suffering. It stands as a powerful reminder of the strength of conviction and the human spirit when faced with the darkest depths of cruelty. In the 3rd century, Roman Africa was boiling with religious and social unrest. Carthage, once a powerful rival of Rome, had become one of the wealthiest Roman provinces, and one of the most uneasy. Christianity was spreading fast through all layers of society: slaves, soldiers, and even nobles. And with it, a dangerous idea: allegiance to a heavenly kingdom above the emperor. Septimius Severus, the emperor born in Africa himself, understood the threat this new faith posed. It challenged everything Rome stood for. Under his rule, local governors in Africa cracked down harder on Christians, eager to win imperial favor through brutal loyalty. Vibia Perpetua was born into one of Carthage's richest aristocratic families. At just 22 years old, she was a mother to a newborn, living a life of comfort and privilege. Raised in the heart of Roman elite culture, she spoke fluent Latin and Greek, was well-read in classical works, and trained to be a dignified Roman wife. But something in her soul reached beyond comfort, beyond tradition, toward a calling that would cost her everything, greater than the social conventions of her time. When she discovered Christian teachings, Perpetua felt as if a hidden truth had finally been revealed. It gave her the meaning she had been longing for. Felicitas, on the other hand, stood at the lowest end of the Roman social order. As a slave in Perpetua's household, she had no legal rights and no hope of freedom. Just 20 years old and 8 months pregnant, her life was about to change in unimaginable ways. Despite her status, Felicitas had a sharp mind and an unshakable will that left a lasting impression on all who met her. When Christianity made its way into Perpetua's home, Felicitas embraced it with a fervor that even surprised her mistress. In this new faith, she found a sense of worth and dignity that Roman society had forever denied her. But becoming a Christian wasn't easy. In those times, conversion required a long, challenging preparation period known as the catechumenate. During this time, individuals studied scripture, learned the principles of the faith, and prepared themselves for baptism. Perpetua and Felicitas were still catechumens, unbaptized believers. Though they may have been baptized later, while in prison, they weren't alone. Other young believers were on the same path. Saturninus, Secundulus, Revocatus, and their mentor Satyrus, a catechist who had taken on the role of spiritual guide for the group. Their arrest came swiftly and without warning. One morning in March 203 AD, Roman soldiers stormed into the homes where the catechumens gathered, violently dragging them from their beds and tearing them away from loved ones. Persecutions had become brutal and unrelenting. Local governors, desperate to prove their loyalty to Emperor Septimius Severus, were eager to crush any signs of Christian defiance. Perpetua was ripped from her newborn's arms, while Felicitas, heavily pregnant, was shoved and beaten as she was taken away. The prison in Carthage was a place of misery by design. The Christians were thrown into a pitch-dark dungeon, the air so foul it was barely breathable. Crowded into a filthy space meant for a few, the prisoners suffered from suffocating heat during the day and bone-chilling cold at night. There was no ventilation, no sanitation, and no privacy. Their food was rotting garbage tossed on the floor, and water was so limited that thirst was a constant torment. Many died before ever seeing a judge, a result the authorities fully intended. It was in this nightmare that Perpetua began to write her personal account, a rare treasure of early Christian literature, and one of the earliest surviving texts by a woman in the Western world. In it, she didn't just record the horrors of her imprisonment. She wrote about her dreams, her spiritual growth, and her visions, offering a glimpse into the soul of a woman standing on the edge of martyrdom. Her words, kept alive through centuries, reveal a faith so strong it defied even the threat of death. Her father, a devoted pagan who loved her deeply, visited the prison again and again, begging her to abandon her new faith and save herself and the family's reputation. One especially heartbreaking moment she recorded shows him falling to his knees, calling her daughter rather than lady, a powerful reversal of their Roman roles. It was a father's last desperate cry to the daughter he was losing. But though her heart ached, Perpetua never wavered. Gently yet firmly, she told him that she could not renounce her faith, not even for him, her own life. At the same time, Felicitas faced an even more personal torment. Under Roman law, a pregnant woman could not be executed until after childbirth. If her labor did not begin before the scheduled date of the public execution, she would be separated from her fellow believers and put to death alone at a later time. For Felicitas, who had found deep spiritual connection and belonging among the catechumens, the thought of dying apart from them was unbearable. The entire group joined in desperate, heartfelt prayers that she might give birth in time to die alongside her brothers and sisters in faith. The answer came just in time. Felicitas went into labor 2 days before the scheduled execution. The pain was unimaginable, sharpened by hunger, dehydration, and overwhelming fear. Her cries of anguish echoed through the prison halls. One of the guards, cruel and mocking, jeered at her suffering. "If you cry like this now, what will you do when the beasts come for you in the arena?" But Felicitas, through her pain, answered with a statement that would be remembered for centuries. "Now it is I who suffer," she said. "But there, another will be in me, and he will suffer for me, because I suffer for him." These words, recorded by those who stood with her, would become one of the most powerful declarations in the history of early Christianity. Soon after, the prisoners were taken to trial. It was nothing more than a political show, a few brief hours to justify what had already been decided. Procurator Hilarianus, tasked with enforcing the emperor's orders, offered each of them one final chance to save their lives by performing a sacrifice to the Roman gods. Each one refused without hesitation. When Perpetua stood before the court, Hilarianus appealed to her as a mother. He reminded her that her child would be left orphaned if she did not comply. But Perpetua, unwavering and calm, simply answered, "I will not sacrifice." That brief reply sealed her fate. But it also displayed a courage and clarity that shook even those who had come to condemn her. The sentence was read aloud with ceremonial flair. The Christians would be thrown to wild beasts during the games held in honor of Geta, the young son of Emperor Septimius Severus. This wasn't just punishment, it was entertainment, a warning to the public, and a statement of Roman power. The event was carefully planned to draw out suffering for maximum spectacle. Different animals would be released in sequence throughout the day to drag the executions into hours of public cruelty. The morning of March 7th, 203 AD, arrived hot and cloudless. People poured into the great amphitheater of Carthage long before the games began. Street vendors hawked food and drinks. Spectators placed bets on how long the prisoners might survive. The air buzzed with morbid excitement. Tens of thousands filled the stone seats, from elite officials to tradesmen to farmers, all drawn by the promise of blood. But when the condemned Christians were led into the arena, something unexpected happened. There was no fear in their eyes, no weeping, no pleading for mercy. Instead, they entered singing hymns. They walked into the arena not as trembling victims, but with expressions of calm joy on their faces. Perpetua stood out. Her confidence puzzled the spectators. She boldly refused to wear the ritual robes forced on the condemned, garments dedicated to the Roman gods. Instead, she reminded the officials that she had made a pact to die as a Christian, not under false pagan symbols. The horror began slowly, in keeping with the gruesome choreography of Roman entertainment. First came the men. A wild boar was unleashed against Satyrus, and bears and leopards against Revocatus and Saturninus. These animals had been starved beforehand to provoke greater savagery. They attacked ferociously. Secundulus had died in prison, sparing him the public torment. The amphitheater rang with the clash of teeth and claws, the shrieks of the wounded, and the cheers of a crowd hungry for violence. The organizers reserved a special cruelty for the women. A wild cow, chosen for its symbolic insult to female dignity, was released against Perpetua and Felicitas. Driven mad by the roar of the crowd, the beast charged Perpetua first. It gored her, tossing her high into the air. She hit the ground with a brutal thud. Yet through her pain, she calmly adjusted her robe to cover herself. Even amid the chaos, she protected her dignity. Seeing Felicitas injured nearby, she stood up and helped her to her feet. It was a small but powerful act of solidarity. They were sisters in faith, and even in their last moments, they held each other up. As the crowd watched this quiet strength, some began to shift uncomfortably. These were not cowards. They did not beg. They prayed aloud, looked after one another, and held fast to their faith. The image was disturbing, not for its horror, but for its grace. Roman propaganda had painted Christians as weak and traitorous. But here, before thousands, that lie was breaking. The longer the execution dragged on, the more people watched in stunned silence. When the animals failed to kill quickly, the authorities grew impatient. The order was given: bring them to the center and finish it with the sword. What followed was the final act in their defiance. Calm and composed, the Christians embraced. They exchanged the kiss of peace, the final gesture of unity and forgiveness. Felicitas was the first to fall. The seasoned gladiator struck swiftly, and she died in an instant. But Perpetua faced a clumsy novice. His first blow missed, cutting painfully into her collarbone. She cried out, the only time she had shown pain during the ordeal. Then, in a gesture that still echoes through history, she reached out and guided the sword to her own neck. She helped the man killer. Their deaths shook the very foundations of the Roman spectacle. Instead of crushing the Christian spirit, they had exposed Rome's cruelty for what it truly was. The executions didn't scare people into obedience. They inspired them. Witnesses left that day changed. Many began questioning the empire's values. Across Roman Africa and far beyond, conversions to Christianity began to rise. Perpetua's diary, smuggled out, preserved, and copied, became one of the most influential writings in early Christian history. Read from Spain to Syria, it gave voice to the voiceless, to women, to slaves, to believers who faced death for faith. The brutal death of a noblewoman and a pregnant slave did more to undermine Roman authority than 1,000 speeches. Even by Roman standards, this spectacle was extreme. Gladiator games were already violent, but this, forcing 2 women to die by wild animals, prolonging their agony and making it a holiday event, was a new low. It exposed a dark truth, that Rome's love for power had become a hunger for suffering. More than 18 centuries later, Perpetua's words still burn with clarity. Her writing captures not only her courage, but her inner transformation. She became a symbol of strength, not just for Christians, but for anyone who chooses principle over fear. Her refusal to sacrifice her faith, even for her family or her life, set a moral standard that continues to echo. The story of Perpetua and Felicitas remains more than a tale of martyrdom. It reminds us that the soul of a civilization is not measured in military victories or architectural wonders, but in how it treats the powerless, the different, and the brave. These 2 women, so different in birth but united in spirit, showed that love, truth, and courage can outshine even the darkest cruelty.